This is KVMR-FM, and you're listening to the Tibet World Tibetan Radio Hour. My name is Joseph. There's a new book out called Falling to Heaven. It's a novel set in the 1950s in Tibet. Welcome to KVMR, Jeanne.
Hello. Thank you, Joseph. It's great to be here.
Tell us how you got the idea to write this book.
I'm a psychologist, and one of the things that I've done is worked for years with survivors of torture and communist re-education. And these survivors are actually from all over Asia. And so I had quite a lot of experience with sitting in the same room with people who had been through horrifying experiences and were maybe only getting a couple of hours of sleep a night, having nightmares and flashbacks. And so I became really fascinated with communism as a phenomenon and the very repressive way that it was brought into certain parts of Asia. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't set out to write a book about Tibet and about two Quakers entering Tibet. I sat down and did a writing exercise one day, and this story began to emerge. And I was somewhat flabbergasted because I didn't really know a whole lot about either topic, but I love doing research, and so that's how it started. And once the story began to emerge, it sort of led me by the nose, and I just followed it where it took me, including traveling to Tibet and Nepal to complete research.
Is this your first book?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a debut novel.
And what was the one thing that made the story be about Tibet?
The one thing that's very unique about the invasion of Tibet is that Tibetans were so isolated before the Chinese came in. And that was their policy, to be isolationist in order to protect their traditions. And they just wanted to be left alone to do that. And then here comes a communist invasion of people who have trucks, airplanes, telephones, radios, things that Tibetans had never seen before. And so it was a terrible shock for them, and they were so outgunned from the get-go. I found that so heartbreaking, and I really wanted to make that very real for my readers. So that's why I ended up focusing on Tibet.
Very well stated.
Thank you.
I want to tell listeners right now that Jeanne Peterson is going to be coming to Grass Valley at the end of this month, and you can meet her and listen to her talk about her book and how she wrote the book. It's going to be Thursday, September 30th, 7 p.m. at Summertime's Cafe on South Auburn Street in Grass Valley. Have you ever been to Grass Valley before, Jeanne?
I have. I have been to both Nevada City and Grass Valley a number of times because I have a friend who lives in Nevada City, and I also have another friend who grew up in Grass Valley, so she sort of showed me around her old stomping grounds, and that was really fun.
Mm-hmm. Let me read another passage. What I remembered most about that day was the image of Genevieve, wrapping her tiny hands, one on top, one on the bottom, around the hand of each woman as she spoke to her. The gesture was almost unbearably tender. She didn't preach, she listened. Each prisoner drew near to those sparkly eyes like a cat drawn into sleep before a hearth fire. Genevieve was right when she told me. The love of God is in that place. She gave it, and she got it. How did you decide to write about the Western image or perception of God and then the deities in the Tibetan Buddhist pantheon?
That, I would say, came from my own experience of initially being very heavily into a Christian tradition, starting around the age of 17. My parents raised me as agnostic. There was no real religious education. But I chose to become a Christian at that time. And then I found, as I met more and more people who were not Christians, but who seemed quite connected to God, I could feel that. I found Christianity to be too limiting. And so then I began to explore Buddhism. And I began to practice meditation and other, and just let Buddhist thought sort of settle into my psyche. And so this book was, I don't think I consciously said, oh, I think I'll integrate my two experiences of religion in this book. That's just sort of what happened. And it's funny because I kind of figured out what the book was about after it was done. I didn't set out to, with all the plot points laid out. It just sort of emerged, and I went with it. And so that's how that happened.
Now, I believe you're the second American to write a novel about Tibet. Is that true or false? Do you know?
I do not know of another American who has written a novel about Tibet. I do know of a Scottish man who wrote a novel. It's called Blue Poppies. His name is Jonathan Falla.
Uh-huh. William Pattison.
Yes.
Who lives in the...
Elliot Pattison.
Oh, it's Elliot?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
He's written several sort of murder mystery novels.
Yes.
Set in Tibet.
That's true. You're right.
So
you're right.
I feel you're the second American.
Yes, you're right.
And then there's a handful, well, even less than a handful of Tibetans who have written novels about Tibet, which are kind of hard to find in the U.S. Did you have trouble finding a publisher?
Yes, I initially went forward to find an agent, a literary agent, and I found one in London. And the story of finding a publisher is quite interesting with this book because it was a little bit hard to place because it's an unusual book. So the first publisher was in Germany, and it's the Bertelsmann Group, which is an imprint of Random House. And so the book is out in Germany, in German. And then the second publisher that came on board and bought the book was Santillana, which is based in Argentina, and they bought worldwide Spanish rights. And so for a while I wondered if my book would ever come out in English. But finally, St. Martin's came on board, and then also One World, which is based in the UK. So it's out in the U.S., in Canada, the UK, and Germany at this point, and the Spanish one is on its way. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's exciting.
And can you give us a brief synopsis of the book?
I'd be happy to. Falling to Heaven sweeps us back into old Tibet in 1954. The communist Chinese have been in Tibet for about 4 years, and they're working very hard to win over Tibetans to the communist cause, without a lot of success, I might add. We see this world through the eyes of a Tibetan man named Dorje. And the Chinese try very hard to recruit him because he happens to be half Chinese and half Tibetan. So they think he could be very useful to them, but he has absolutely no intention or interest in helping them. At the same time, these two American trekkers arrive in Tibet, and they manage to rent a house right in Dorje's neighborhood. Their names are Emma and Gerald, and from the moment Dorje and his family meet them, they are all destined to be friends for the rest of their lives. And so this friendship is a beautiful thing, but also a terrible curse, because the communists get very angry when they see Dorje hanging around with two American capitalists. That's how they see it. So the communists abduct both Gerald and a member of Dorje's family and throw them in prison to be re-educated. So from there, we go with Gerald into his cold prison cell, his interrogations, and eventually his near starvation. And we also travel with Dorje, his family, and Emma as they flee over the Himalayas to go into exile. both of these elements, imprisonment and going into exile, are very common experiences for Tibetans. So my goal with Falling to Heaven is to bring readers into all the sights, smells, sounds, and emotions of Tibet's struggle.
What I loved about this book, well, first of all, I know a lot about Tibet, so I kind of knew what was going to happen in this book without reading it first. And I was just wondering how it was going to come up and what you were going to do about it. And I just, the foreshadowing that occurred in the first part of the book that I picked up on was so subtle, so matter of fact. Just like the last sentence in the paragraph, a purpose that none of them could fathom. And my favorite part is this really chilling event on that begins part 2, where Gerald and Emma are walking in the local marketplace, and it's in Emma's voice. And then what happens in the next few minutes with the Chinese soldier and the knocking over of a local woman's market stuff and Gerald picking him up. And God, that was so chilling to me. And I said, no, now that it's going to hit the fan. Now it's going to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. We've turned a corner now, and there's no going back.
A cold shiver went down my spine when I read that part. And it seems so real. Did you witness anything like that when you were in Tibet?
I didn't. I didn't. I certainly read many accounts of different human rights abuses and chilling incidents in the words of Tibetans. There's a wonderful book I should recommend, which is called A Strange Liberation.
Oh, yes.
By David Patt.
Yes.
I absorbed almost every word of that book because it's 3 accounts in their own words of Tibetans talking about what they had experienced at the hands of the Chinese. And so those kinds of incidents were not difficult for me to imagine after immersing myself. And I'll also add that I read a great deal of works by Chinese dissidents who had experienced the same sort of persecution from their own government.
And what's been the response since the publication, since it's published in the U.S. in English?
It's been incredibly positive. I've gotten some lovely reviews on Amazon, which are there for the world to see. And people have written me personal notes saying, I read this book, I found it in the library in my town, and I want to thank you so much for the blessing of being able to read it. And other people said, I felt like I really knew these characters, like they were my friends. And I knew them so intimately that when the book ended, I felt sad that I wasn't going to be able to be with them anymore. So, and I guess one other type of comment I've gotten a lot is, this really put Tibet on the map for me. I feel something about what's happening there, and I never did before. So that really makes me feel great.
This book starts with almost slowly with mostly character development. And then it has, and I don't want to really spell this out or you to tell anybody, but it has amazing twists and turns at the end. I was really stunned and excited to reading the last pages. And then the epilogue was just a marvelous way to end the book with all these twists and turns. Just bravo to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Has anybody contacted you about turning this into a movie?
I wish. I have actually sent a review copy to a wonderful filmmaker. His name is Dirk Simon, and he made a movie which has had pretty limited release, actually. It's been at some film festivals, and I believe